In prison, for those with superpowers, the rules have to be somewhat different. The inmates have to lose their powers for the system to work. But when they regain their powers, the deal is off, and the prison can no longer contain them. A man gets held down by gang members in a garage. One of the members is wearing a mask. The man on the ground says he did what he was told. Then another man arrives and slices one of the gang members. He starts shooting the gangsters, but one of them can withstand his bullets. So they start fighting hand to hand. Soon enough, the bulletproof man gets finished, and the masked man only took one punch before he fell as well. The man then approaches the one who was being held and utters his name. He tells him that he could not let them end him because he had to be the one to do it. He gives the reason that the man eliminated his little girl and so his life ended with hers. After that, he brings the man to his demise and the police arrive right away. We then see disasters on the news as they cover the globe. Some people acquire superpowers from their effects, and martial law is declared. We see a man supporting a Superhuman Rights Act. Then the newsman speaks of an Ubermax prison coming this fall. We see the man from earlier, Payback, as the first prisoner with superpowers at Santiburon. After that, a man joins the news anchors for an interview. He is Warden Devlin of the prison. He talks about how he keeps the people with superpowers locked up. When the anchorwoman asks him a certain question, he disconnects out of annoyance. The next scene has Payback riding in a bus with other prisoners. They then arrive at the prison and the prisoners step off the bus. As they walk through an area, a man behind the fence tells Payback that he is his. When inside, we see a policewoman punishing a prisoner for being rude to her. The captain then tells them that in the prison, they're just like everyone else, regular. A guard comes to Payback and tells him he's not that scary. And after he intimidates that guard, the lady comes to him and strikes him. Afterward, the warden talks over the speakers and informs them that he sees all. Then the captain electrifies Payback for standing past the red line. Following that, the new prisoners enter the courtyard. Payback meets a man there that he calls Diamond Jim. They soon start brawling and Payback wins. He then says that the problem with powers is that one comes to rely on them, and without them one is nothing. When Payback is about to end the man, a cop zaps him. After that, the two fighters get taken to medical. Then the prisoner Diego meets a man who calls himself Gordon Tweedy. When he sees that Diego doesn't know who he is, he starts explaining to him that he is the conductor. He then starts giving him a tour of the prison. As he does, he goes over a few basic rules. Then Gordon asks him how long he is in for and Diego says for 5 years. Continuing the tour, they run into a monstrous inmate. Diego tries to shake his hand, but the man leaves after saying a few words. They then walk some more and Diego asks Gordon if a man named the Lobe is there. Gordon tells him that he is and Diego mentions some of the awful crimes that the man committed. And Gordon tells him that the Lobe is the last person he wants to mess with. After that, we see an inmate walking with a mask on. He then gets placed in a chair and has his handcuffs and mask removed. The man gets introduced as the Lobe. An unseen individual speaks to him about his parole. But when Lobe starts acting rudely, his parole gets denied. Shortly after, the warden comes to him. He tells Lobe that he should give him his fortune, or else he will mess with the wrong person. He adds that he will ruin his mind, which will end his mind control powers. Lobe then reiterates that he should give the warden billions of dollars or receive a lobotomy. In the next scene, a doctor checks on wounded prisoners. Payback is among them, along with a headless inmate. Diego then comes in to deal with some waste. The policewoman, Morales, is there to give him a hard time. After she leaves, the doctor approaches Diego and tells him not everyone there is out to get him. She then introduces herself as Isabel Joseph. Diego asks her about the headless man and she informs him that he is not lifeless, but just regenerating, and that he will grow his head back soon. Then the doctor comes to Lobe and asks him about his parole hearing. He tells her it went like it always does. Then Payback comes behind her and sets her on a chair. She loses consciousness as he does it. After that, the man comes to Lobe and says he knows who he is. He acquires a piece of metal and attempts to end Lobe with it, but Diego rushes in and jumps on Payback. A guard then enters to subtract Diego from him. In the lunchroom, Gordon congratulates Diego for his heroic feat. While they speak, other inmates come to Diego and give him their Jell-O snack. Diego then asks Gordon what he should do and the monster man, Darius, comes to the newcomer to give his Jell-O too. He tells him to walk with him and they then walk to Lobe's cell. As Diego stands behind his cell door, Lobe thanks him for saving him. Then he tells Diego that he could use his assistance. After a little more talking, the newcomer says he will think about it, and Lobe tells him not to think too long. Then we see the captain talking to the warden about what he should do regarding some information he shared with him. Eventually, the warden tells him to leave the thinking to him. Afterward, he talks to the employee Felicia. They argue about how the warden runs the prison and how he should deal with Lobe. This leads the warden to threaten Felicia with her removal. The scene changes to Isabel talking to Payback as he lies chained in bed. He tells her she's wasting her time tending to the others, and she tells him that he will be locked in this prison for a long time, so he better get used to being with the other inmates. We then witness Gordon going to his parole hearing. The faceless voice tells him he served 10 years of his sentence. Then it asks if he feels like he's been rehabilitated by it. Gordon gives a positive to that and then gets asked how he has done so. He states he has become part of a community, but the one in charge of the hearing is not satisfied with Gordon's answer. He tells him that it's like he doesn't exist. To this statement, Gordon stands and strongly says he exists. He continues to say with a strong energy that he's a person, and the voice tells him his parole is denied. After that, Diego and Gordon sit in the lunchroom. Darius walks by and places some keys near Gordon. He also gives something to Diamond Jim. When Diego leaves the table, Gordon says to himself that he's done. Then Payback walks into the courtyard and challenges the inmates to brawl with him. Meanwhile, Gordon undoes his jumpsuit and gets ready for something. He follows that by undoing the device on his leg with the keys that Darius gave him. Afterward, he comes to Diego and thanks him for being a friend. Then Gordon starts taunting the guard there and he calls for backup. He then stands on the table and removes a wire from the ceiling. He places it on himself and conducts electricity. Lightning flows through his hands and he uses it to shoot at the guard, knocking him unconscious. This prompts Diego to question what he just did. An alarm follows from that action and we see inmates fighting with each other. The warden asks Felicia where all the power is, and after some time, he watches it return. Payback and Diamond Jim are about to fight, but then the guards there zap everyone. After that, Morales orders all the prisoners to return to their cells. We then see that the shot guard is reported to have lost his life. As the prisoners return to their cells, the warden speaks to them over the speakers. In the next scene, Gordon stands in the doctor's office and looks out of the window in awe. Morales then surprises him with a heavy strike that puts him down. After that, the warden tells her to end his life and she replies that she can't do that. But the warden insists that she does. Next, Gordon taunts her by calling her weak, and this provokes the fierce policewoman to strike him repeatedly with unreserved force. Following that, the news anchors talk about the demise of Gordon as an attempt to escape the prison. Then Diego talks to his wife on the phone. She asks him how much longer she has to wait and then Morales ends Diego's call. She tells him that the warden wants to speak with him. As the newcomer walks with the warden shows him a room where time acts much slower. He threatens to place Diego there if he goes against him. Then he asks him why he got the attention of Loeb, and Diego tells him that it's because of Loeb's carpal tunnel. The warden then says to report back to him what he does with Loeb. He adds that the secret of his power is safe with him, but he should not cross him. What happens next is the warden coming near Loeb's cell and talking to him. He tells him that he heard about his carpal tunnel pain, and then he wonders why he used Diego for his plans. But Loeb responds that he doesn't understand what the warden is saying. This prompts the man to say that Loeb will regret it if he doesn't tell him. Furthermore, the warden tells him he has 24 hours to give him the money, but the Loeb states that he cannot move that much money so fast. And then he says he wants one more thing from the warden, a Wi-Fi password. This angers the man and causes him to give him a fake password that's full of profanity. We then see two guards and Felicia investigating the power room. While there, she accuses them of ending a man, meaning Gordon. But the two guards tell her what was stated on the news, that he fell in his attempt to escape. Then a montage of prison happenings takes place. One of them is of Diego receiving some mail from his wife. After that, Felicia informs the warden that the backup power has been restored and reminds him his retirement is on Friday. Then Payback enters the courtyard with a red cross on his face. He calls out Diamond Jim, who then comes to him and they exchange insult. And then Diego comes near Loeb's cell. He mentions that they are friends and then asks Loeb to tell him what's going on. He says Gordon lost his life and he is just a piece that Loeb moves around. But Loeb tells him to relax. This leads Diego to ask him what he wants from him. The answer he gets is to have patience, and when Loeb tells someone to do something, he has a good reason for it. Loeb further says for him to sit tight until Friday. Later, Felicia walks into the warden's office and argues with him. Then the captain shows up to join the argument. After he leaves, the warden states he might put him behind a desk. When Felicia asks how he can consider him for such a position, the warden says the guards follow him and the inmates are scared of him. Before she leaves, Felicia tells him he's making a mistake. Then the captain comes to Diamond Jim and says he wants him to be on his best behavior until Friday. A while later, the warden enters a room where the captain and Felicia reside at. He tells them that it was a difficult decision for him to make and announces that the captain will be taking over as the new warden. He advises the man to hang on to Felicia. Then the warden visits Loeb in his cell. He hands him a device and the Loeb starts transferring money. Then we see Payback and Diamond Jim getting ready to fight again. Diamond Jim transforms and says to everyone that they got their powers back. That leads to the inmates fighting the guards and each other. Meanwhile, Felicia calls the warden and informs him that the inmates are using their powers. As the warden tries leaving the cell, he notices he is locked and calls to be released. Back to the fight, we see that Diamond Jim is now winning against his rival. And the ruckus continues throughout the prison, with prisoners using their powers to cause mayhem. Following that, the guards retreat and the captain radios Felicia for help. Then the Loeb gives the warden his device back and tells him that it's payday for everyone. Meanwhile, the captain walks into the power room and has Felicia guide him on what needs to be done. She tells him he needs to reset the generator, but he yells into the radio for her to answer him as he is not able to hear her. Then Diamond Jim enters the area, looking for the captain. He hides from Jim. When he reaches for his gun, he accidentally knocks down a wrench for Jim to hear. Then we see Loeb telling the warden that he knows something the warden doesn't know. But the warden does not believe it and says he knows nothing. Diamond Jim then approaches the area he believes the captain to be hiding, but it's revealed he isn't there. At that moment, we observe how Officer Morales beats down several inmates on her own. Then Jim finds the captain and throws him on the floor. The captain tries to cause damage to the man, but is unable and so gets struck down. Diamond Jim follows it by holding the smaller man against the wall, but he manages to escape his grasp. When he does, he takes the wrench and slams a pipe with it, causing smoke to spray in Jim's face. Then in the cell, Loeb uses his superpower to swap minds with the warden. The warden, who is now Loeb, strikes Loeb and knocks him unconscious. As that takes place, the captain walks through the smoke and radios that the power has been reset. Afterward, a guard opens the cell door and the warden leaves. He tells the guard to place a mask on Loeb and put him in solitaire. Then he comes out and talks to Felicia. When the warden awakens inside the Loeb, he tells the guard who he is while he gets taken away. And then he gets placed in the time-warped room. While continuing to speak to Felicia, she tells the warden that Diamond Jim is lifeless, and he tells her to get a cleanup in the generator room. But then she questions how he knew it was down there. That is when the warden thinks quickly and says he uses deductive reasoning, something one needs as a warden. He then finishes the conversation by telling her she is the new warden instead of the captain. Following that, we observe many inmates lying injured or lifeless in the courtyard. Payback yells loudly as the only conscious one among them. Then Diego comes to Isabel in her office and tells her he's getting transferred. Felicia then starts moving into the warden's office and eventually she sits comfortably in what used to be his chair. After that, the captain retires and tells Morales that his family is next for him, and she is now the new captain. We see then how Diego heads for the bus for his transfer. The final scene has Darius leaving the prison with Morales. She tells him how the warden was almost pleading to release him. Then the previous warden drives by in his truck and tells Darius to get in. He confirms his flight to Switzerland soon after. When Darius gets inside, the man that used to be the warden looks at himself in the mirror and perceives himself as Loeb. What follows is both of them riding away together.